There's a few different ways to get a design on a shirt. In this video, I'm gonna go over how I took this little pigeon drawing and turned it into this shirt. I'll start with coding the screens and then take you through the whole design and digitizing process. Then we'll make the screen and eventually print the shirt. If you're new here, my name is Adriana and I run a business called From Line to Line. If you like vlogs and tutorials, please subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. I like to share screen printing tutorials because when I was first starting out, I feel like I couldn't really find any videos that answered all of the questions I had. So since it's been a few years since I started my business, I think it's time I share this information with you. I'm by no means an expert, but I will do my best to answer any questions you leave in the comments. I'm going to take the whole process I went through and try to make it as simple as possible because I know how intimidating it can be to start screen printing. So the process is going to go a little bit like this. We'll get the design from sketch to transparency, then we'll burn a screen to make the stencil for screen printing, set up our screen on the press, print the shirt, and finally cure the shirt. So let's get into it. My process always starts with coating the screens. Pour the emulsion into the scoop coater, carefully pull up on both sides of the screen. If you need help with this step, check out my video on how to burn screens for screen printing, linked right here. I used AP Blue emulsion for this video, but I usually like to use PWR emulsion, both from Screen Print Direct. I don't have a dark room, so I dry my screens overnight in my laundry room. It's really important that you let your screens fully dry before you expose them. You'll know the emulsion is fully dry when it doesn't feel tacky on the screen. As I was told in my last video, you can skip this step of drying the screens overnight if you use a hairdryer to dry them, but I prefer to dry them overnight just to make sure that they're fully dry and so I can work on my design while they dry. So let's get back to the pigeon. I drew this guy a little while ago and got some requests to put him on a shirt, so here we are. The second step in the process is creating the transparency so we can make our screen. There's a couple ways to do this. You can digitize your drawings, or you can draw directly on the transparency sheet with an opaque black marker. I go over this in my other video I mentioned as well. For this design, I used Photoshop and Illustrator to digitize my pigeon. I put the whole sketch in my scanner and transferred the image to my laptop. I set my resolution to 300 dpi and scanned the drawing as a PNG file. I opened the pigeon scan in Photoshop, and here I can crop the image just to be the page with the pigeon on it. I like to crop everything that's not part of the page off to make the process a little easier. Then I go to image size. I want my final pigeon print on the t-shirt to be 13 inches wide, so I set the width to 13 inches, and this is also a good time to check that the DPI is set to 300 like it was for the scan. Next I hit image, adjustments, and levels. Here I can adjust the brightness and contrast to make the dark parts darker and the white parts brighter. At this point there might still be a few gray bits here and there, so I go to image, adjustments, and threshold. To fix that, I just mess around with this a little and hit OK once it looks good. Then I want to move this pigeon down a little, so I add a solid color behind and just shift his little pigeon body down. Okay, next we move the pigeons over to Illustrator to vectorize our boys. Okay, now in Illustrator, I'll open up the pigeon file and set up my artboards. Each artboard should be the size of the transparency sheet you're printing on. Mine are 11 by 17 inches. I want this to be pretty big on the shirt, so I set it up on 2 separate artboards. Then in Quick Actions, I'll hit the Image Trace button. Then I make some adjustments here in the Image Trace window. Under Advanced, there's a few more options to get the drawing to look exactly how I want it. Since it is a pen drawing, I want to keep some of that hand-drawn feeling in the final print. Then down here under Ignore Color, I'll just click the check mark to have it ignore the color white, so it's just the outline of the pigeons. Then I hit Expand, and now here they are, fully vectorized. And now I can place them where I want on the artboards. I got a little ahead of myself earlier. I want the top half of the pigeons to be on the top artboard and the bottom half on the bottom artboard. The first time I did this, it was a little confusing, but I think it'll make sense once I print out the transparencies. The last step before I print this is to make little registration marks here. The registration marks are really helpful when it comes time to line up the sheets on the screen, especially if you're printing multiple colors. Taking the time to really set up your screens and press correctly before you start printing will most likely save you a bunch of time later. That's why it's just a good habit to use registration marks for every print. Okay, now I tape the two transparencies together to make one big transparency sheet. Just make sure they are all lined up and use some clear tape to tape them together. It usually takes a second to get this perfect. It's just important to get enough of the drawing on both transparencies for you to get the full image. Now for burning the screens, this process is going to vary depending on a bunch of different things. The kind of emulsion you're using, your exposure light, the distance from the light to your screen while you're burning it, and even the humidity in the air. These are the numbers I figured out after a lot of trial and error in this studio. If I'm using PWR or AP Blue emulsion, my exposure time is usually around 25 seconds, with the exposure light at about 12 inches from the screen. I use a piece of foam that's the exact size of the underside of the screen to keep any light from going in while I'm exposing it. So it goes foam, screen, transparency sheet, and then a piece of plexiglass to weigh down the transparency sheet on the screen. All of this is covered in my how to make a screen for screen printing video. Once it's done, I put a piece of cardboard over it, and usually I bring it to my washout booth outside, but since I recently moved to Pennsylvania, I didn't account for my washout booth being frozen outside during the winter, so I'm using my bathtub. A pressure washer can be helpful during this part, but if your screen is properly exposed, it should wash out pretty easy even with just a detachable shower head. I spray the front of the screen first and then the back, then I let it sit for a few seconds, and then I go over the whole thing, and usually the design just washes right out. It's always so satisfying when this works the first time, but do not be discouraged if your design doesn't come out the very first time you burn a screen. I like to keep a couple unexposed extra screens in the laundry room just in case I need to try more than once. Okay, so back in the studio, we can tape up the edges of the screen. I tape the back with this sturdier blue tape that is harder to take off, and I add yellow tape. It's kind of like painter's tape on the front to make cleanup easier after I'm done printing. The blue tape on the back will probably stay there past the cleanup. I also added a little piece of tape over any pinholes on the back of the screen. Finally, to printing. Always do a test print. This is very important. Sometimes it looks like the screen is perfectly exposed and everything is great, and then you go to print and there are pinholes or the emulsion didn't fully wash out in some areas, so it's always important to do a test print. Okay, first print looks good, so let's go ahead and print our shirt. I like to use water-based inks for my prints because I find the cleanup with just water much easier and also way less smelly than plastisol ink, especially when you're printing in a smaller space. Printing with water-based inks, I find makes the process a little easier. I like the soft hand feel that water-based ink gives to my final prints as well. While printing with water-based inks though, it is a good idea to keep a water spray bottle around to spray your screen in between prints to keep your ink from drying on the screen. The last step in this kind of extremely long process is curing the shirt. There's a few different ways to do this part. I'm using a heat press since it's just one shirt, but if I were doing a full print run with multiple shirts, I would probably use a flash dryer, or if I had one, a conveyor dryer.
If I had one!
You can also use a heat gun, and there are additives you can add to your ink to make the curing temperature lower so you don't need as much heat to cure your shirt when you're done. This water-based ink cures at 320 degrees Fahrenheit, and I press it for about 20 seconds. Just have to make sure I cure the entire shirt since it is a big design. And here it is, our finished pigeon t-shirt. Probably one of my favorite t-shirts I've ever printed. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, again, just leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. These pigeon t-shirts will be on pre-sale at some point this month, March 2025, on my website, so check that out if you would like to get one. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see any more videos from me in the future. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you in the next video.